Okay,
Mhm.
so good evening, everyone. I'm just going to substitute for Elmo today so he can have a little break for his
Yeah.
voice. All right. Um,
Okay.
but we are going to read the story of a servant. That's going to be the first one of the book Heaven and Hell. So, but before we start, of course, let us say our prayer. And we start this second part of our meeting with prayers of gratitude for our health, for the opportunity of being here this evening with this discussion, for the presence of the benefactors that have been assisting us from the very beginning. We ask for protection, courage, and strength for all our friends who have already left our meeting and are now going back to their homes. We ask for protection, courage, and strength for all of us and for those who are not here with us this evening for one reason or another. We are grateful for this opportunity and we hope to put into practice everything that we learn here from our friends from the spiritual realm. And with this in mind, we invite all brothers and sisters from the spirituality who, like us, are also in need of education and consolation. And together, spiritual realm and physical realm, we ask the permission of our benefactors to start the second part of our meeting. So be it.
So be
So, who is going to be, quote unquote, volunteered to read?
it. Okay, I will. Okay.
Thank you, Saraida.
You're quite welcome. Okay. So we begin with the story of a servant. Everybody's ready?
Unfortunately, I don't have the page number in mind. So,
513. Oh, it's 513 on mine.
okay.
513.
But if you have a screen, I put it on the screen so you can
It's on
read
the screen.
together with us. Yeah.
Okay. When you're ready, you let me know.
I'm ready. If you want, you can start reading.
Okay. The story of a servant. In a family of the upper nobility, there was a young servant whose intelligence and fine features surprised us with their air of distinction. One could detect nothing based upon him from that aspect. His eagerness to serve his masters displayed none of the civility common to those in his position. When we returned to visit this family the following year, the man was nowhere to be seen, and we asked if he had been dismissed. No, we were told. He had gone to spend a few days in his hometown and had passed away while there. We mourned his loss a great deal, for he had been an excellent young man possessed of sentiments well above his position. He was very attached to us and had given us proof of great devotion. Later, we got the idea to evoke the young man, and this is what he told us. During my next to last incarnation, I was from an upstanding family, as they say on earth. However, my father squandered our assets in his extravagance. I was orphaned while very young and had no resources. A friend of my father took me in and raised me as his son, providing me with a good education, from which I derived a little too much vanity. That friend is today Mr. G, in whose service you had seen me during my last life. I wanted to expiate my pride by being born into civil position, and where I would have the chance to demonstrate my dedication to my benefactor. I even saved his life without his ever having known about it. It was at the time a trial from which I emerged victorious, since I had enough strength not to allow myself to become corrupt by contact with an always corrupting environment. Despite bad examples, I remained pure and give thanks to God for have been rewarded with the happiness that I now enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so in this part of the text, we see a young man that passed away in his last life, and in his last reincarnation process, he was a servant. Actually, he was what is called a gentleman's gentleman, a
Yeah.
footman in the Victorian terms, for instance. So he's not just, even among servants, he was already in a position that was a little bit more prestigious. Being a footman was actually one of the top positions in among servants, and among one of the top positions. So you see that this individual, despite being a servant, already showed some refinements. Refinement in terms of intellectuality, refinements in terms of his manners. And then, as he passed away, he was contacted later on, so he's now in the spiritual realm, and he's being contacted, and he's explaining that in his penultimate reincarnation, the next to last reincarnation process. So before he was a footman, he used to be a rich person in the sense that his father had a lot of wealth, but unfortunately the father had squandered that wealth, and he still brought with him a lot of pride, perhaps for not having as much as when the father was alive. He doesn't mention anything, but he does mention that he still had some pride in him. So then he comes back to this physical realm in his last reincarnation, the one after his father had squandered a fortune, and is now in a position of serving someone. And this very same person that he served in his last reincarnation was or used to be a friend of his father, a friend of his father's in the one before last, and the one that actually allowed him to have an education, to have some degree of refinement despite all that happened to him. So we are just getting an idea of how the two reincarnations for this gentleman, for this young man, how they happened, how they actually unfolded.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Okay.
I think in some way relates to the last question that we're studying the Spirit's book, right, Julio? You know, the classes and the difference of classes, and you know, in the sense where he was and where he is, but not really in terms of moving into on the social scale, but in a sense what we just studied in terms of classes, right? We just mentioned.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, this is from a time when, even though society was not officially divided in castes like in India, for instance, you still had a lot of difficulty to move up or down. I mean, you in Victorian England, for instance, you could be an earl, you could have no money, no character, no intelligence, and you still had the title. And that title opened every possible door for you. People would still talk behind your back because you are not paying your bills, but they still lend you money because you were an earl. You had the title. The title was the most important thing. So that was what we were addressing indirectly in the last question of the Spirit's book, because there it was just saying that sometimes society constrains us or constrains our mobility, or we feel constrained ourselves. So in that case, whenever society has these limitations for movement, whether we move up or down, we end up living lives that are actually fake fake lives or hypocritical ones. This is a little different in the sense that he placed himself, as we are going to see, he placed himself in a condition of servitude because he wanted, it was a choice, he wanted to purify the last remnant of pride that he had with respect to this particular type of social mobility. Anyone else? Okay, Soraya.
Okay.
Continue.
Under what circumstances did you save Mr. G's life? I was following behind him while we were riding horses when I saw a large tree just ahead starting to fall over, but he did not see it. I called to him by shouting with all my might. He turned aside quickly and the tree fell at his feet. Without the movement I had caused, he would have been crushed. When we mentioned this incident to Mr. G, he remembered it perfectly well. Why did you die so young? God deemed my trial to have been sufficient. How could you have profited from such a trial if you had no remembrance of the cause that motivated it? In my humble condition, I still retained an intuition of my former pride. I am quite happy at having been able to control it, a fact that made the trial profitable to me. Otherwise, I would have to go through it all over again. During its moments of freedom, my spirit remembered, and upon awakening, it retained an intuitive desire to resist the inclinations I felt to be evil. I earned more merit struggling in this way than if I had clearly remembered my past life. The memory of my former position would have exalted my pride and would have given me trouble, whereas I only had to combat the allurements of my new position.
Thank you.
What? Okay.
Okay. Ron, could you just go back one page, please?
Okay.
Thank you, Ron. All right. So he even mentions that he had the opportunity of all the things that he did that were positive or constructive for himself. He also mentions that he had the opportunity of saving Mr. G's life at one particular incident when a tree was about to fall over, and by shouting to him, he managed to call his attention to the fact and prevent his sudden demise. But what is important here is to see that this is a spirit that is coming or came to his last reincarnation process with not only the idea of a debt of gratitude. Because we may read this and think, okay, so he came back and he became a footman for Mr. G, a gentleman's gentleman, just because he had a debt of gratitude. But then after he mentions this event, this incident, he starts telling us that he placed himself in such a position because he knew, as he puts here, I still retained an intuition of my former pride. While in the spiritual realm, he was fully aware of that pride. And being fully aware of that remnant of pride, he wanted a position, he wanted to work in a situation where it would help him get rid of that pride or polish it in some way, at least diminish it in some way. So this is already a spirit that may still have the pride as we see it, but is already willing, that's the most important thing, willing to address that. And then he tells us that a little bit that it was not important not important if he would retain the memory of that pride or not, because he had, as he puts very clearly, the intuition of that former pride. And that intuition was more useful to him while in the physical realm during his reincarnation process than the full awareness, full cognizance that he had that pride. And this is sometimes difficult for us to accept. We always say, oh no, if I knew everything that I have to go through, if I knew everything I have to learn, I would do better. Would we? I really don't think so, because it would create a lot of issues for us that we are not aware at the moment. Perhaps the person that we are now listening to the most, the person whose advice we heed the most, is some form of an enemy or someone we owe a debt of gratitude from a past reincarnation. And knowing that now would make the relationship awkward. So this is an example of a situation where a spirit is telling us, I did not know, but I had an intuition of something that I had to do. The intuition of addressing that former pride. And that was enough for him to have a successful reincarnation process.
Julio, do we have this intuition at times and we just ignore it?
Well, we all do, Zoraida. We all do.
Right?
Yes, we all do, because let's think of it. God, we say God is infinite justice and infinite wisdom. Therefore, God cannot will suffering to his own creatures, to his own children. It's not, either we believe in one thing or we believe in another. We cannot believe in that both of them are correct at the same time. So if God wills us reincarnation processes for us to address our problems in our own way, so we can have the merit of our growth, of our development, there has to be a way for us to retain an inkling, an intuition.
Yes.
Not only that, we also have the sleep state when our perispirit is free to detach partially from our physical bodies and have a powwow, have a conversation with our mentor, or even with all other mentors and benefactors. So it is our pride actually that kind of covers it, veils it, because we do not want to admit to ourselves that that intuition is telling us to do something in the opposite direction, or to do something that we have to put some more effort into. It is our pride that veils it still. So even if we were given to know everything, trust me, we would not believe half of it. It's like when João mentions it, that if we had an apparition, half of us would run away, scared, and the other half, most of us of the other half, would not trust it. We would think that it's some form of trickery or some form of light effect or something. It's the same thing with this topic. If we were given to know everything, our pride would still move us away from it. Because we have to address the pride. That's the root of our problems.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question, just to make sure that I understand. This Renato here, if you don't recognize my voice. All this transformation happen in two reincarnations period, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's because João is already laughing. I don't know if it's because we hear so much on the mediumship meeting, the spirits that stay for so long having a hard time even to forgive anything, that I'm not saying that the word is amazed, but I'm still trying to process these last two cases. The last week's case was, in just one lifetime, you pretty much, have,
You're thinking of Count Max.
it's you know it's you know I understand this is me. I'm not you know I understand this is me, but I'm still for some reason I was under the impression that you know this is gonna be hard. It's not gonna be like just you know one reincarnation, boom, you understand, and then you move on. And two reincarnations, you're already you know figuring out how to evolve and make better and understand. And I was like, man, this is not how it works. But you know, if you know, evidently, I'm you know, I have to I have to study more because I didn't thought it was that. I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm not saying that, but I was still wasn't an impression that it will take a little bit longer than like one or two incarnations in order to learn and apply. It's not just you know learn. It's the application of the knowledge that I'm kind of you know in awe with this case.
I think your doubt is valid, and I agree with you. It sounds perhaps too good to be true at first, but we have to understand when we read these things that we also saw cases where the spirits did not show any improvement. Remember that? You studied with Elmo, right?
Yeah.
And here we are studying some success cases of success. But even with when we say it's a case of success, we have to understand that we are getting a very but very small, very succinct summary of his lifetime. It's Do you really believe that he went through his entire life as a footman, as in this life of servitude, and he never grumbled, he never complained?
Oh, I'm sure he did.
There must have been a situation or another where that happened, or where he said a bad word, or he committed an action that he regretted later on. But overall, and this is what is most important for us to understand, because a lot of times we say to ourselves, oh, I will not put the effort, I will not do that because I don't have the energy, I don't have the strength, I don't have the courage. But what this lesson is telling us, and the next one is the same thing, is that overall, when we look at the entire reincarnation process, he had the willingness to approach things constructively. Nowhere in this lesson is saying that he's a saint, that he had a perfect reincarnation. Count Max was the same thing. He said that he used to own the castle where now, in that his last reincarnation, he was a beggar, who's I think he was sleeping in the with the animals, right?
Yeah.
And but can you imagine? He probably felt cold. That was Germany. He probably felt the cold of winter. All right. And he probably had situations where he was not very happy. But overall, if you average everything, his behavior was a positive one, which tells us that we don't have to be perfect, that the benefactors do not expect us to be perfect, that God does not expect us to be perfect right now, but that we can actually do something that is on average progressive, constructive. That is what is important. Here, it's not about mistakes of the past, because like he said, he had only an intuition. And when the idea of mistakes, for instance, we go into the fatalism. No, he came with the determinism of actually doing something positive for himself. He didn't know if he was going to succeed, but he tried, and overall, his behavior was constructive, which is a lesson for us.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Judah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, Sarai?
Okay. What good was the brilliant education you had received during your next to last incarnation, since you did not remember the knowledge you had acquired? Such knowledge would have been useless, even nonsensical, in my new position. It remained latent, and I had now regained it. Nonetheless, that knowledge was not completely useless because it helped my intelligence develop. I instinctively had a predilection for elevated things, which inspired me with repugnance for the low and ignoble examples I had before me. Without that education, I would have been nothing more than a servant.
Thank you.
Are the exam? Okay.
Okay. So here is that little story I always like to tell. Imagine that we in the spiritual realm, we are coming to a new reincarnation process. See this new reincarnation process as a role. You're going to go into a play where you're going to be a character in that play. You're going to have a specific role. So you may know many languages, but in that play, you are going to be playing a character that only speaks English. So when you come to the play, even if you know another language, you cannot talk in another language because otherwise you will be out of character. This is the situation with all of us. We know a lot more than what we bring to every reincarnation process. We bring what is important for us for that role, that specific role. So this is what he's saying here. Knowing all that education, having all that education will not be anything practical. I won't say necessarily useless, but practical for this reincarnation, right? Because he would not be able to apply it. He would not be able to use it. In the times he reincarnated, at that time, social mobility was a lot harder than it is today. So even if you were a genius, being born and being in that servile position would have made it very, very difficult, almost excruciating for him to be able to move up or down. So he brought to that reincarnation process what was important for him. And what was important for him to do relate, to lapidate that particular amount of pride that he still had. He probably has other issues. He still has other flaws. But in that reincarnation process, that's what he addressed. That is what he came for. And he brought with him the arsenal of tools to help him do that. It is important for us to understand that, notice when he says here, I instinctively had a predilection for elevated things. The moral side is always with us, because the moral side is what defines us at one particular point in our evolutionary journey. So he may not have had the intellectualization to express it, or to do this or that in the intellectual from the intellectual point of view, but the moral side was within him, guiding him throughout that reincarnation process.
Yeah.
Renato, going back to your question, these cases, they prove to us not that it is common, but that it is possible. I think that's the important thing, right? Because if we go through the book here, we have many cases of spirits, hardened spirits, spirits that regret, spirits that are going through the ups and downs of their time in the spiritual world and the physical world, preparing for a new incarnation. But these are spirits in this last page, are spirits that made the progress in a more efficient way. And again, going back to Paul of Tarsus, right? It's possible to do inside one incarnation the change, right? So if it's possible to do inside one incarnation, it's possible to do in the spiritual world and coming back to a new one, right? But again, it's not common. It's just possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
just
sorry.
thinking here.
Mm-hmm.
I know the answer already, but I was just processing while you guys were talking. Uh, we do have the moral and intellectual. That's the two wings, as we call. But there's the variable there that I usually call that's the physical. The as Julie was saying, when we come here, we bring all the moral, the intellectual not necessarily, but we still bring also the physical things that we do, uh, um, things that we done in consequence that affect our spiritual body or perispirit that we have to deal with. And I was just thinking here that the good thing about it would be the intellectual to bring that, but for some reason we don't, because otherwise, and as Julia always say, we're gonna keep on playing the piano all the reincarnations. But if we smoke or if we do drink or drugs or something, that we have to deal with that here. So it's just a matter of be in a position where you have to study more and understand that.
Renato, think of it this way. Imagine that he had brought all his intellect, all his knowledge, and now he would be in a position where he would not have the time to read a book, to have great philosophical discussions with anyone because of his position. Imagine how excruciating that would have been. So in a way, it was a blessing not to have it.
Yeah, I didn't think about it this way.
Yeah, no, but I understand because we are now living in a society where the social mobility is different than what it used to be 100 years ago. But at that time, think how excruciating would have been for him to have all that knowledge and not be able to open his mouth. Just to remember, this is from a time when the master of the house would pass, walk down a corridor in a house.
Mm-hmm.
The servants had to turn their backs to the master. They were not allowed to look at the master. Okay? Most servants, he's a footman, of course, but most servants had to turn away or hide behind, walls or hide behind a piece of furniture. In Victorian England, the servants were not allowed to look at the master or in the master's direction. The same for the lady of the house. So imagine now that you are that particular servant and you know a lot more than your master or the lady of the house, but you have to put yourself in this, well, let's put it, humiliating condition. On top of everything, not only it is humiliating because we know today that we should not treat other human beings like that. So that's what I mean by humiliating, not about pride. But on top of everything, imagine that if you had all that knowledge, you wouldn't be able to control your pride either. You would be two things to deal with at the same time.
Actually, it's interesting because if you go to the houses in Newport, the houses of the billionaires of the 19th century, the houses were built in a way that they had a whole way behind the main rooms for the servants to walk. It was after slavery, but the servants would never be in the presence of the owners. Only the butler and the chief of the staff and a couple of others. The others would never be in the presence of the masters. They would never even be in the same room as the master. They will enter the room only when there will be no one there.
Okay, thanks, Julia.
Okay.
All right, so go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Are the examples of selfless devotion of servants toward their masters the result of previous relationships? Have no doubt about it, for such is usually the case. Sometimes such servants even used to be members of the family, or as in my case, duty-bound persons who pay a debt of gratitude and whose dedication helps them to advance. You do not know all the effects of sympathy or antipathy that these previous relationships produce in the world. No. Death does not interrupt such relationships, which often last from century to century. Why are such examples of dedication from servants so rare nowadays? Blame the selfish and prideful spirit of your time, aggravated by incredulity and materialistic ideas. True faith departs when faced with cupidity and the desire for material gain, and when faith departs, devotion. By leading people to the truth, Spiritism will revive forgotten virtues. There is nothing better than this example. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say, well, you can finish actually, because that is not going to be adding anything.
Okay, okay. There is nothing better than this example to demonstrate the benefits of forgetting one's former existences. If Mr. G had remembered who his servant had been formerly, he would have felt very uncomfortable and would not have kept him in his position. He would have hampered the trial that ended up being advantageous to both of them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so here we have two very important things. The first one is the idea of the selfless devotion of servants. And the very first thing I'm going to say here is that be very careful with the answer. Notice that in the first sentence you have a word saying usually. It never said always. So if someone is someone's servant this time, does not necessarily mean they owe something to that person. You have to be very careful indeed, especially because when this particular answer was given, or the question was put forward and the answer was given, most of humanity worked as servants. We would have, for instance, a regular manor house where 4 or 5 people of the family would live, and then you would have a battalion of people to serve them. Sometimes more than 50 people. You had almost a 10-to-1 ratio between owners and servants. So we have to be very careful because times have changed a lot. Today, we have jobs, which is different than a servile employment. Very different. So when we see this, we have to look at it and interpret it with an idea on the times when it was dictated, when it was asked, when the question was asked. But yes, there is usually a relationship with those that are around us. There is usually a relationship, but the relationship is not necessarily so direct. This is an example of a direct relationship. Mr. G, in the past reincarnation process, assisted this young man, helped him, educated him. And in this reincarnation process, he brings in that little pride from that past reincarnation, and he, because of his affinity with Mr. G, chooses to be there and is granted that, his choice is granted so he can address it in an environment that is conducive, that is organized for him to be successful. Not that he will be. He will only be successful if he applies himself, if he wills it. But he chooses an environment that will assist him. He already had an affinity for Mr. G. This is the relationship. This is the directionality there and the intricacy of the process. But we should not look at everything around us today and start looking, say, oh, so in my past life I was this, I did that, and the other. No, I have to be very careful with this answer. In those days, where most of us were working in a servile form of employment, yes, there was a lot of affinity, whether the affinity was through hatred or love or admiration or gratitude, there was an affinity. But we have to be very careful how we see it today. When we look at this, I like to remind everyone of a passage from the gospel when we have the chapter, we cannot serve both God and Mammon, where we are told, because we all envy wealth. And when we have wealth, we don't use it properly. So on the side of the wealthy, we are not careful enough, most of us. And on the side of those who are not wealthy, we have the envy. And the gospel is very clear, saying each one has its quota. Each one is at a position to do the best for himself or herself in order to progress. The reincarnation process is not only one, and it's not forever. So if we now in one position that we don't like very much, we will one day be in another position. Not because we will deserve, but because we have to experience different things in order to progress completely, both intellectually and morally. Having said this, the gospel goes on and says, therefore, make sure that whatever your position is, that you use it wisely. You have wealth, apply it wisely. Use it wisely. You can actually take pleasure from it. There's nothing wrong with it, but apply it wisely. You don't have wealth, you are in a situation of difficulty. Obey your master, because that master is the condition that you chose to be able to improve yourself. If now you go back and you complain and you moan and groan the whole time, you are actually complaining about a position you placed yourself in, and you're losing the opportunity to improve. Then we go to the second question, because when we say this, immediately there's always that voice that says, oh, but that means I have to suffer. No. When we speak of serving, serving a boss, nowadays we don't have masters, we have bosses. Whether the boss is a person or a corporation or an entity, it doesn't really matter. We have a boss. I'm just going to say boss here in general terms. If we don't do our job, we are actually guilty of negligence. If that work, if that job is excruciating, is overwhelming, is unfair, we should work to change conditions. That is possible. This is why God has given us the spark, the principle of intelligence, and allow us to use it, and in doing so, develop our free will, develop our intelligence. In doing so, we will improve conditions for ourselves and for others. But we have to be very careful, and we are the only ones who can judge our actions, thoughts, and words. How much of what I'm trying to do now is to change conditions for the better for me and everybody else? And how much is negligence, laziness, procrastination? We are recording everything we do. Our mind, our consciousness are recording everything we do, and we will be the judges of our own actions later on. This is what these two things are addressing. Okay? There is a little bit of a bitterness in the second question. Why are such examples of dedication so rare nowadays? We always look at the past with nostalgia. It's not exactly like that. Today, we have the same amount of negligence and the same amount of dedication, but they are manifested in different ways. And each and every one of us can only judge his or her own actions, thoughts, and words. We should be very true to ourselves so that we don't find ourselves back in the spiritual realm one day regretting opportunities that we lost here. Not that we missed, that we lost because of our procrastination, our laziness, our pride, and so on and so forth. But we should not point fingers at our brothers and sisters. Each one is going to judge for himself or herself. And finally, we have a little comment saying how important it is for us to come here and accept this veil of forgetfulness, which is only temporary. Because despite this veil on our past, we have the intuition. It's there with us. And like I said before, we always go at night. If we want information, not out of curiosity, if we really want help and assistance in a particular moment of our lives, we can ask that. And the individual who has the ability to ask for it in one way or another will receive this help during the evening and will bring it on the next day in the form of a very strong intuition. Sometimes things that you will just say, it's a gut feeling. I cannot put into words. It doesn't matter, but you will be going on the right path. Having all the knowledge would be a lot more detrimental because we would be placed in very awkward situations where we would be looking at people and remembering things we have done to them or that they have done to us. And perhaps we would find it a lot harder to see the good side of them if they actually were the ones that injured us, or the other way around. We would be so embarrassed for having injured them in the past that we wouldn't even be able to approach them to ask forgiveness or to do something positive, constructive for them and to them. So we need to have the faith. The lesson is telling us to have faith that whatever God gives us, whatever we are in each reincarnation allowed to remember through intuition is what is enough for us at that moment, is what we really need, not what we want.
Hey, Julio, just wanna clarify something for myself here. I understand perfectly not to remembering. It makes a lot of sense now because it's gonna be more detrimental than help. But I was thinking more of a line of, for example, if you, as Ron was saying on the previous session, if you smoke a lot, depending on what you do, you might or might not have something at physical level. It depends on what you do. If you take care of your body and everything, you might have just little stuff as because there is a consequence. Not necessarily it's gonna be an eye for an eye. When I posed the question before of remembering, was more of on this sense. Not remember, for example, if you are a pianist, not remembering that you were a pianist and all that intellectual part, but you have that ability if you want to develop something like that. But I remember that we studied before that sometimes it's better to block it. So even if you try to, let's say, play the piano, you won't have any ability or skill at all. So in order for us to develop intellectualmente in different areas, not just be stuck on that piano. So that was the line I was thinking, not to remembering exactly what happened, but have that, let's say, option. So if you can use it to make it, I understand that, as Jusara said, this is not a vacation. It's not supposed to be easy, but for lack of the better word, to make it easier for us to overcome our challenges.
Renato, yeah, you're right. I would just say, when you say block, try to keep in your head what this word block in this particular case means. If you reach a point where you have developed yourself so well in one aspect, because of the law of progress and because of our intelligence principle that is always spurring us forward, always trying to give us the creativity, the curiosity. We reach a point where we self-discipline, where we discipline ourselves, and we say to ourselves, okay, I have mastered, or I have conquered a high degree of this. I want to learn something else. So this blockage is not imposed. It's self-imposed. This is very important. When we come to this reincarnation process, we impose on ourselves these blockages, okay? Because to think that there is a blockage that is imposed by another spirit would mean derogation of our free will. And then we have a lot of problems to deal with that situation. So individuals who did master or got a high degree of something by their own curiosity, because it was curiosity that led them to develop that to such an extent. It was not something that fell from the heavens or they plucked from a tree. They developed out of their own inherent curiosity. So in the process of developing that skill to that degree, they also realized some discipline. They created for themselves discipline. Discipline is not imposed, it's actually developed, like the free will, like the intelligence. And eventually they reach a point that they tell themselves, okay, it's enough for this for now. Let me look at something else. One, because I'm curious about something else. And two, because it's important for me. So they block themselves. So just let us just look at the block under these conditions so that we do not break all the beautiful flow of the natural laws, of the idea of free will, of the idea of the intelligence principle, and so on and so forth. What the higher order spirits or benefactors, whichever the case is, tell us is basically they guide us, they talk to us, they give us ideas, but ultimately we are the ones who execute all of these things. So the blockage is actually this blocking phenomenon, we call it, is something that we impose on on ourselves.
Yeah, that was breaking news, right? Oh boy.
Because it's important. It's like a structure, if we now make, instead of making the structure like this, we make the structure like this, it will fall. Or if we start taking certain columns and pillars and pylons from our structure, eventually the whole thing comes down. So we have to be very careful. It's not the words that we use, as long as we understand what is the concept behind. I'm not going to say don't use block. That's not fair. But we need to understand when we say block, what we truly mean by block in our doctrine. So that everything that we say is always hand in hand, chained to all the other concepts, that we don't have anything as a weak link.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I was, when I heard the first time the word block, I was thinking, you know, okay, Renata, you already know how to play the piano. Trust us, you don't need that anymore. So let's just block this part here. Let's move on and do something else. I never thought about, that I would be, or I mean, us as a spirit would choose to block that. I always was under the impression that was something that, like you hate to say, the plan. They know what's best for us, and then we just trust and follow through with the, quote
They
unquote plan.
do. Those that are more evolved than we are, they know what is best for us, but they still let us do it. Because otherwise,
Right.
we do not have the merit when we are successful, and we cannot be responsible when we are unsuccessful.
So you see, you
So,
make it hard for me to make an excuse and complain.
yes, I'm trying to make it very hard for all of us spiritists to complain. Exactly it. And this is why it's so hard in spiritism to sell spiritism, because if someone comes to it with a lot of pride, the person won't take it. The person will have to suffer a lot before that individual will take it. Because in spiritism, the major condition is the acceptance that we drive the chariot of our progress. We are the horse, the buggy, and the person sitting on the buggy, flogging the horse. All in one. We cannot blame anything or anyone. And that's hard to take.
I miss the good old days when they have the devil, right?
Yes, it was a scapegoat.
Thanks,
Blame
Julia.
the devil. To blame the devil did it.
When you could confess and get rid of your sins.
Yes.
All right.
That was very easy, Renato. You gotta take responsibility.
No, I don't want to.
You gotta try, right?
Well.
Okay. All right, Julio, we got 8:40, so it's been 1 hour already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not going to start the next one.
Yeah, and the next one, if you like horror movies, is a great one, right? Buried
Antonio
Alive.
B. Oh my God,
Yeah.
yes.
But
That's a horror.
you should read before going to bed, because it's very uplifting.
Oh, no.
No, it's very uplifting.
Yeah, so the first paragraph is hard, but then it gets a lot
Yes.
better, a lot beautiful.
It's quite
Yes,
beautiful,
it
yes.
does. The beginning is scary or so, but
Yeah.
no, it's true.
It's literally Tales from the Crypt.
Oh my goodness. That's not the good.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for staying with us. I hope you enjoyed. Again, we are going to post it on YouTube, so you can see again and hear again if you want. So any volunteers to do our final prayer? Anyone raises your hand?
No.
No. 1, 2.
I'll say the prayer.
Okay, Zoraida, go ahead.
Okay. How blessed is Jesus, our guardian angels,